welcome to GizmoSapiens show 280. Calling this one Learning on the Brink. I'm Chris, and with me today is,
I am Matt.
and there's a couple things we're going to do. We're going to connect the big three anxieties about the future of work and learning. We're going to talk about students who struggle to read long form texts, communities racing to save endangered languages with iPads and Macs, and an IA data center boom colliding with a massive shortage of skilled workers. Um, so, you kind of have to ask when you zoom out and look at this from afar is what happens when literacy, culture, and infrastructure all hit their limits at the same time. So, kind of as an intro to this, institutional literacy, cultural memory, and skilled labor all feel like they're hitting their limits at the same time, and and that's the tension we're seeing, and bringing up in this episode. College instructors are saying that more students are struggling to read and stick with complex tasks, not tests, texts, TEXTS, while some of those same devices that we blame for distraction, iPads and Macs, are being used to keep endangered languages like the Cherokee Indian language alive in classrooms. And then on the other hand, we have AI data center boom is running into an old-fashioned bottleneck. We don't have enough skilled workers to build them, to run them, to do anything. Economists warn that the U.S. may be heading toward one of the largest labor shortages in its history. So let's move on to segment one. Can students still read? So there are reports that college instructors are saying that a surprising number of students struggle to read and retain even moderately complex texts.
I saw a thing the other day that suggested that 40% of college students can't read.
Yeah, and what they meant, I read a couple articles about this, and it, sensational headline type. You have to take that, read the,
Still,
but what they were talking about is it's not that they can't read, but they don't have any reading comprehension, and they don't have the attention span to read a text. And that's what they mean by can't read. And most of the articles said, because that same statistic came up in one of the articles I read. And that's out of hand. And I don't really blame that on technology because
no, I lay that
that's that
squarely
in the
on
face of
the.
the educational system.
Well, sure, because they're so concerned about social engineering that they've forgotten that reading, writing, and arithmetic are what they're supposed to be focused on.
Well, I mean, if you look at all the things that they make them do in public schools and even private schools today, there's there's definitely not an emphasis. Uh, Reminds me of college emphasis on the wrong syllable. Um, there's not an emphasis on the core structures of learning, the things that you need to then be able to reason. And that's the reading, writing, and arithmetic. Let's focus on like athletics and gym. I mean, if you really look at high school today, uh, there is a much bigger focus on extracurricular activities than there is on schoolwork, because schoolwork is all about passing standardized tests. It's not about reading something and comprehending it and being able to explain your reasoning behind it. I think we might have been one of the last generations to go through public schools where reading comprehension and the reasoning for our arguments were part of the educational curriculum.
Oh, I uh wholeheartedly agree. And that's not just, us patting ourselves on the back, but I think there's clear evidence that we're the last generation that actually had any kind of academic rigor at the middle school and high school
Yeah.
level of education.
And I
Uh,
remember my dad talking about how much less academic rigor was required for us to go to school than when he went to school, at the same level in the 60s. And and I don't doubt that. At the time I kind of blew it off like, yeah, no, no, no. it's harder because we have to learn more new stuff. But the reality of it is it that had nothing to do with it, that we actually had more knowledge, um, because they weren't really teaching more knowledge. They could only teach so much. Uh, but uh, the we that change of emphasis in schools to extracurricular activities really started in the late 70s, and by the time we graduated in the late 80s, early 90s, um it hadn't fully matriculated through the entire educational system. But you get 20 years later down the road, and you really see it, like when my kids were in school, uh in the 2010s and early 2020, because my last two graduated in 2020 during COVID. It was wonderful. uh well, 2021, the spring of 2021. But the going through that whole period there, you could see that. And the funny thing is uh students who really want to learn will learn. My daughter is a perfect example of that. I just think, and I was not a pushy parent in this case. I did not push her to academic excellence. I didn't say you must come home with all A's and a 4.5 grade point average, and she found what she was good at, and she jumped on it, and and stuff. But she found ways to get around that by, like, we've talked about this before. In Ohio, we have the what used to be called College Credit Plus or CCP program. I don't remember what they call it. They've changed the name, but it's the same thing, where you can go to a local college or university and get both high school credit and college credit. And when she was 12, which was the earliest age they allow you to do it, she took advantage of it. And so she, you know, she started hand taking, that the whole idea of my education is my responsibility into her own hands, and moved forward with it. And it was kind of funny, in our school district, where I live, there is high academic achievement, uh, both on the from the state test perspective, and then also as college graduates. High school kids going to college and graduating and come with degrees. um, but they had a lot of students who were doing the college credit plus system, and because of that system, and then what I would call the more traditional students who go to school and they take the classes and they take the AP classes. Now, she took AP classes too, and pass the test, because a lot of kids who take AP classes take the classes and never take the test to get college credit for them. Um, but the school, unofficially, or officially, for the school policy is that they got rid of student ranking, because the kids who were going to college were getting higher grades, 4-point grades, uh, than the kids who were taking all the AP classes, because there was so much bullshit around the AP classes that, they were saying it unfairly was affecting class ranking. And come to find out, Ohio state law requires that schools keep class ranking. So they were still doing it because by law they had to. They just weren't telling students and families what it was. And but the kids kind of knew, and they knew
Of
who
course they know.
was number one and number
E
two in their class.
Everything about being a kid is competitive. You always know what the score is.
Well, yeah, that was always the bullshit about, let's have a soccer league. We're not going to keep score. All the kids knew at the end of the game who scored five and who scored two. You know.
They know.
So as a side note, just as a funny, uh, my son, now I coached my oldest daughter's soccer team, and uh, his soccer games were always after her soccer games. And I think we'd watched Christmas Vacation too many times,
Mm,
because he didn't really want to be out there playing soccer, but he agreed to do it because his two sisters were playing soccer,
yeah,
and we were all out there
all
and
day anyway.
all day anyway. And so they had a game, and it was they didn't really get beat badly, but they got beat by like one. When they line up and they're supposed to shake hands and say good game, good game, good game. He did the whole thing from Christmas Vacation, the whole shtick, like, you know, you're ugly, you have boogers in your nose. Yeah. And so then I got talked to by the coach. I'm like, dude, I don't know if I'm more proud of him for doing that, or yeah, at least he was honest with his feelings. He told a couple kids they suck.
You suck.
But that, going back to this, um it's not, in our last episode we talk about public trust,
Yeah.
and that applies to a lot of our institutions, including schools, particularly public schools. And there's a lack of trust in the public schools because um people like us who still had some academic rigor in their educations look at what's being taught, new math and new this. And I actually had somebody, and her husband and I were really good friends, but she argued with me over like new math. And I told her, I said, new math doesn't mean anything. I don't need them to write an array to figure out what a large number is to calculate it. I need them to just have it memorized, because when we do things, and I said, that's the way college operates. You have a PhD. You know that's how college operates. But she was so enamored with the whole new education process that, she defended it like it was death.
Well, and that's ingrained in our. Oh, you know this.
Yeah.
The colleges that teach teachers how to teach have gotten confused as to what the mission is.
Well, well, not only are they confused about the mission, but it's an argument I've had for a long time about certain college degree programs. Like, we have schools that we call teachers colleges. Technically they're not, but if you look at the majority of the degree programs that they graduate, they're producing teachers that will teach in the public school system. Well, the problem is one, there's too many for the number of jobs that are available. And then two, because they're just pumping these teachers out, does not mean that these teachers are of quality educators. This is, to me, the first thing that there's a couple things that I think are counterintuitive or oxymoronic in our education system, at least here in the United States. Uh, One of them is that we don't place greater academic rigor at the university level on people who are going to come and educate people, who the goal is to educate these people so that they can then continue and go on to the university level. But the other thing is that because we don't do that, we allow teachers to be treated, and they think of themselves as blue collar workers, or in many cases unskilled workers, because we allow them to have labor unions and everything else. You know, and almost no other profession that you work in where you have gone to school and gotten a degree do you deal with uh, a labor union and collective bargaining for your salary. You understand your value and your experience, and you negotiate for yourself. You don't negotiate your value and experience along with 40 other people, because at the end of the day, what does collective bargaining get you in that instance? It gets you mediocrity, because the people who are at the top of the game, the ones you should be rewarding, can't be rewarded, and you're dragging along a bunch of bottom feeders who should be let go.
I can say the same thing of law enforcement.
Absolutely.
I'm still not. I don't know enough about fire department to say much about that, but certainly law enforcement, any of the public sector unions, they're all mostly useless and all about
Superfluous. Well, I mean, it's
protecting the ones that should be let go. I
but
mean,
it's not
that's
really about protecting the ones that should be let go. It's protecting people who they don't want. It,
Well, again,
I,
it all
I'm
comes
about
down to money.
I'm about it all comes down to money, but I'm about to say something. I don't know if you'll take offense, even though you're a non-practicing, non-affiliated Catholic. Um, but if we look at our history in the early church, the early Catholic Church, they didn't encourage education of the masses because they wanted.
Oh, it's about control too.
Yes, it was about control, and that control was both monetary as well as
Well,
controlling ideas and indoctrination. And
there are several ways that an institution can maintain control over a population. That's history is replete with that.
what gets me is, on the flip side, we're finding innovative ways of using technology in education today. So, um,
Are we though?
you know what, the thing is it's not in um it's in corner cases, like the instance of where, um in the Cherokee Nation, they're losing the last actual native speakers of the language are dying off, and the current Cherokee people don't have records of their language, or they only know kind of pidgin words and things like that. And so, prior, they're using technology, computers and tablets now, to not only document the language and its structure and grammar and all of this, but they're also using it now to teach the next generation of Cherokee students the language.
And you think that's a good thing?
I don't think it's a bad thing, because technology is not bad in and of itself. And the use of technology is not bad in and of itself. It's how we use technology that can be bad or good. Hence Skynet. I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Skynet was intentioned to be good.
I saw a thing the other day that mm, mm, I need to look into it a little further to see how um, what data supports this conclusion. But someone was putting forth the idea that um, the experiment of using technology in education has has failed, actually.
So I've read several articles on that, and I don't totally agree with it. Um, here's my thing about technology. So, and I'm going to use AI as a good example. Technology, the technology we have today, digital technology, whatever, has its place. Um, it is certainly a good technology to teach writing skills and to teach reading skills, and to use for doing rote memorization exercises and all this stuff. Um, it's also a bridge to higher education, where technology is more pervasive because it is a time saver. Um, but I think the way we've applied technology in educational environments, there has been good plans, again, good intentions, good plans put in place, but the people who are entrusted in using those plans are not comfortable using the technology, or they use the technology wrong. That because the thing is they're not. So my argument before about the whole new math thing, like, to add large numbers, they would build like this array of points, and they would break the numbers down and stuff, and that's great to as a demonstration, but it's not practical in real world use. When we went to school, do you remember the worksheets like in first and second grade where you would do your addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? And the whole idea was not to uh, have you build an array. They were trying, because they were time tests. They were trying to get you to the point where, if somebody said 10 times 2, you would know it was 20 immediately. Uh, and the idea was to give you shortcuts in order to calculate those numbers well. And those translate. I teach kids. I've taught my kids. I've taught my nieces and nephews. I've taught my now my I expect to teach my granddaughter the same thing, but how to like multiply big numbers in your head in a very short period of time accurately without having to get a calculator out. And I am not one of those people who, like, we used to have teachers, you'll never have access to your book in the real world. And I'm like, have you ever been into an engineer's office? There's a
Mm.
whole library of books sitting on their desk, and half the time there's one open on there. And now with the internet, I can look the same texts up, you know and but those are aids in helping me remember large amounts of knowledge, because what ends up with knowledge that they don't ever acknowledge in high school but they start to acknowledge in college is that the things that you use on an everyday basis for your job are the things that you will internalize, and the things that are not important, they get dumped. You dump it to crumpet. And I never found, I had to take 4 semesters of calculus in college. I don't think I've ever used calculus once in my career, but I use trig every day. You know, I use algebra every day. So I remember those concepts. But what they've done with kids and students is they've tried to modify how they're teaching to the way they think they play. And I'm not entirely sure that this whole gamification, it works in some instances, like Duolingo, I think, and similar language learning programs do really well in by gamifying the whole concept, so you pick up on it and you pick it up pretty quickly. But I'm not entirely sure that it works well for everybody, because some people get competitive, and so they figure out what they can do that's easy to get the most amount of points
To game the
to game
system.
the system, as opposed to actually retaining and learning that stuff. And the other thing is that schools have never taken account of, and I don't know if you took Gary Johnston's education class.
I'm not, I don't recall.
So the thing we learned in that class, and the thing that stuck with me, and part of the reason it stuck with me is because it made me identify what kind of learner I was. But we went through there, everybody learns through all 4 different versions, but they are dominant or co-dominant in a couple of ways of learning.
Right.
And being a musician and a computer guy, I'm predominantly a kinesthetic learner, meaning that there has to be some physicality part of it, so I can learn an instrument and learn how to read music and learn music theory because I'm playing an instrument and there's physicality with it. I learned how to code because there's the physicality of typing it in on the keyboard. There's some action. But you have kinesthetic learning, you have visual learning, people who can read it and retain it. You have oral learners who can hear it and retain it. You know, and but everybody's a combination of these learning types. And so uh, school does not take any kind of educational training, doesn't take advantage of the different learning types. And and oddly enough, being a primarily kinesthetic learner, church has always been tough for me, because if you make me sit down on a pew, I'll go to sleep. I used to go to sleep in class in college all the time. I'd be like, this is bullshit, but I noticed that my grades in school got better between my sophomore and junior year of college when I got a laptop for the first time to take to class. And I know a lot of people are like, well, the activity of writing notes, and that's part of kinesthetic learning too, makes you retain that data. I mean, there's all kinds of studies, both educational and scientific studies that talk about that. But for me, it was the act of typing. Those classes that I thought were completely boring, the fact that I was typing my notes into the computer, which I could type faster than I can write.
Yeah, most
Um,
people can.
I was retaining more information and I was paying more attention in class. So, there's truth to that. And so, for those kids who are kinesthetic learners, if they can take notes on frankly, I don't think an iPad cuts it taking notes on. Because the keyboard doesn't have enough tactile feel for you to really feel like you
Well, that and you're only really using your thumbs anyway.
correct. Uh, I think there's probably some merit to using a stylus with a tablet in that case, but typing your notes on a laptop, I can understand how kids, but is that going to work for everybody? No. Also, you have to take into account, it's just like people who are athletically talented. There are people who are not going to be able to type. They aren't going to have the coordination, um, or I shouldn't say can't be able to type, won't be able to type well. So what are you doing to accommodate those types of things? And and some of the things about and my son's on the spectrum, and I watched him go through school and he graduated college and everything else, but I am quite aware that for him to really learn something, he has to be able to get up and walk around. And like when I'm on the phone, I do the same thing. I get up and I pace the room while I'm walking. The other thing that I do even today as a strategy, because I do have ADHD, is I have a standing desk and I will stand at my desk for 20 or 30 minutes of time doing work. Just the act of standing helps you concentrate because it's not just about retaining information, it's about concentration. And, no matter where you are, whether it's in school, at work, there are going to be distractions that you have to deal with. And I just don't think the things that the use of technology in and of itself is not bad, but the educational theory that needs to go behind it and say, hey, look, we need to be able to present this data to everybody. Because the other problem you have that I struggled with was I learn a lot faster than other people. Well, I shouldn't say I learn a lot faster. What I should say is I ingest information faster than other people can. So when I was in school, and I'm just using myself as an example, I was always bored, which then caused me to, I wouldn't be paying attention or I would do something else. They'd catch me drawing at my desk or whatever because they would present the concept. I would read through the book and I'd be done. And they're still, and public school, any kind of classroom setting, public, private, university. Well, university is a little different because the concept in the university system is that, and the reason you have so many bad professors is that it's not incumbent upon the professor to teach you the information. It's incumbent on you to figure out how to learn the information and then regurgitate what I want back. And that's a big difference between being babysat in the public and private school system to college. And I also think it's like the CCP program. If you're successful in the CCP program, that student you can guarantee is going to be successful at when they actually go to college. Um, because it's an indicator that they don't need somebody to sit there and babysit them to get their work done. Which also means that likelihood in the workforce, they're going to be successful. Because again, you can tell them what you need done and they'll do it. I also think one of the things that has permeated the issue of things that are not good practice in business, things that we shouldn't be doing in business, things that I consult for the government, so I get and I worked for the government. Um, there are things that they have taken on. You take a most businesses are bureaucratic at some point, and they became really bureaucratic um, after World War II. As everybody came home, and so you created this hierarchy of system, and you have gatekeepers, and you have meetings to disseminate information and all of this stuff. And even though we have technology that helps make that dissemination better, the reality is the culture of meetings, which permeates business today and government, uh, is kind of useless because you have meetings that would require a two-line email.
Yeah, there's
And
meetings
now that we
about
have now that we
meetings.
have Teams, we even have more meetings, because now you don't have to gather people in a room, and we could just, hey, let's have a quick meeting, with you and your 20 best coworkers. And
There's reasons why there's a demerit badge for survived a meeting that should have been an email.
yeah.
I mean,
Well, heck, when I worked for the Air Force, we joked around, and my colonel eventually had patches made that called us PowerPoint Rangers,
yeah,
you know, because we'd have meetings to go present. And I mean, we'd present. I literally uh, had to gatekeep for my colonel at this one. This is a good story too. They had this program where they would take um, enlisted folks, people who were E5 or less, so tech sergeant or less, uh, so they could go through the officers candidate school and become officers. And so they would make it through that school. They're all prior enlisted, so they have experience. Which the whole idea was is that you have people who have like 10 years of experience as an enlisted, an NCO or senior enlisted, and but we're not like the top three: master sergeant, sergeant, senior master sergeant, and chief master sergeant. Um, and then they would make them butter bars, you know. And the problem is when you go from NCO where you're kind of like a subject matter expert to a lieutenant, and there's a reason they're called officers because they're general, and why general officers are even more general than regular officers. Uh, and the culture within the military was, impress your commander so that you then can, make to the next rank. And so we had all these second lieutenants running around building presentations, but having been former enlisted, were subject matter experts on things that I knew my colonel could care less about the detail of. And so they were coming to me. I'm sitting at my desk, and they're coming to me. Hey, can you look at this presentation I'm about to present to the colonel? And one of them was trying to explain networking. And I'm first of all, I'm like, why? Colonel Corder did not ask to be briefed on this. And this is in the back of my head. And I'm reading through it. And I mean, smart. It was smart presentation. I forget what they used. It was like um, they were trying to explain fractional T1 lines versus, T1 lines, and how you had so much bandwidth. Um, and that's why it was called fraction. So the fractional T1 lines made a full T1, and you could split it all out and all this. And they were using beers and beer kegs as the analogy. I mean, it was smart. You would remember it, but I'm like, this is really good, but do not present this to the colonel unless you expect to be yelled at. And he looked at me, and I'm like, dude, she's not concerned with this, but I mean, I would get like 15 of those a day because we had like 10 of these butter bars running around. And I'm trying to counsel these kids because they were, I mean, I shouldn't call them kids. Many of them were older than I was at that time. you know, I was in my mid to late 20s, and some of these guys, they were either my same age or they were a year or two older because they had been enlisted for 7 to 10 years. But that the whole idea was that, well, it was getting FaceTime to be memorable in front of your
right.
your
Well,
superiors. So, hopefully they give you a glowing review, and you get a line number, and shortly, instead of being a butter bar, you're a first lieutenant, or a captain. Or what was funny is we had one of these guys who was in this program, and he was an academy grad, but if you he got waitlisted for the academy, and so he agreed to be a recruiter for the Air Force while he was waitlisted. And so they gave him he became an NCO, went to basic and boot camp and basic and tech school, and then went directly to being a recruiter. And so he skipped like a couple of enlisted grades. And and because of that, he had been around this whole workings before. He was a lot sharper in respects to how to interact with senior officers than these guys, because most of them, they interacted with, you know, a captain at the most prior to this, and but again, it's not that these people aren't sharp, but it's the direction and how you educate them and how you give them you treat them to the culture that you need, not the culture that is pervasive and exists. I mean, and this happens in businesses all the time. I mean, I don't know how many meetings I have with my government customers that, again, could have been a two-line email.
Well, and the other
And
thing,
yeah, and on the flip side, I get two-line emails. Hence, when I was working at lunch today while we were having lunch, that was like, "Hey, we need this by Monday," and I'm like, "There's no way you're getting this by Monday. I won't get the answers I need by Monday." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday.
that's pervasive in business in particular is personality is more important than merit
In many cases.
in a lot of cases. Um,
Well, yeah. So this goes back to something we learned in college as music majors,
yeah.
and that was because I'll never forget this. I heard this from Gene Marquis. I heard it from Chief. I heard it from Gary. Um, all professional musicians who had played in orchestras, and they always said, you don't have to be the best player in the band. You have to be the most reliable player in the band. And that was more about personality than it was, you know, you had to show up. You needed to be on time. Luckily, my dad was former Army, and on time meant being early at everything. Um, you know, and that reliability, which was really personality based, made people start to like you because then they could trust you. And again, it's a pervasive theme lately, erosion of trust. But how do you build that trust? And that was one, in that those relationships, that's the way it is. And frankly, that's the way it is at work too. you know
Well, I think beyond that, there's a thing where charisma gets rewarded more than competence.
Oh, it does. Well, also common backgrounds, common, and I play that game all the time. I hate to say it, but it's one of my other best friends. He's former Air Force and works in the same industry, and the way we became best friends was just common background.
Yep.
Hey, you did this, I did this. That whole esprit de corps. That's what they call it in the military. But I worked with folks like one of the guys I used to work with was a former professional soccer player, played in England and the Premier League, and played in MLS here in the United States, and another was a former Olympian in the I think his last Olympics was the '96 Olympics. And because they had that athletic thing, they were really good friends and close, and but they played it. They played that game, that tool too. When they would go to customers, they would find out um, that they're former college football player or college basketball player, and so they would then use those common experiences to gain a level of trust because they had shared experiences, which then let them develop a relationship. It's a bridging tool. And one of the guys I used to work with, he was not an athletic person. He was a uh, but he loved sports. And so his go-to whenever we talked to anybody was he would look and like we'd go to a customer's office and he would look and see if they had any paraphernalia from the school they went to. And I remember one time we went over to Indianapolis to visit a federal customer, and he went to Marshall University, and so he started talking about Marshall, and he because he was a math guy, uh, he knew all the stats. You could name a baseball player, and he knew their batting average, but he was that way with football, and that way with basketball, and it didn't matter if it was NBA or NCAA, he knew it, and so he would ask, so how's your team doing this year? Have you seen any games? And instant rapport all of a sudden. Also, uh, again, it's the social skills that a lot of times, you know, not only do they get you in the door, they get you ahead, and then excelling at what you do uh, becomes the enabler of trust because you're able to execute what you're telling them you can do.
It's the back half of that that I think we're lagging behind
Hmm.
in. We have put such an emphasis on soft skills that we have forgotten that there's an actual job to be accomplished,
Absolutely. Well, the other thing is, so
which is why I work so much better behind the scenes than I do in front. Um, because I'm one of those people that tells it like it is, and
yeah, exactly. You don't have
uh,
you don't have the social skills.
yeah, I mean I do, but
You don't you
I
don't
won't
you
use
you
them.
choose not to
I choose
exercise
not to.
them.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, uh the funny thing is I use the social skills to get in, and then I'm very blunt with the customer, and they they
Well, you got to build that trust
you
first.
build that trust, and then
Yeah.
when you're honest with them, that just reinforces the trust. Um, but you're right. The other I actually argue that we probably lack on both. Because there's been a bigger division of soft skills versus hard skills. And we also have what I would call an entitled generation who's entering the workforce right now. Uh, and I would even say that of and don't get me wrong, I'm coin operated. I'm, you know, I'm I'm going to, do everything to my advantage to make as much coin as possible, which is the way jobs work. But I think people trying to do but at this point, I have 35 years of experience um, to do that. Uh, what I think is interesting is that I'm seeing Gen Zers and Gen Alpha kids who are coming into the workforce, and they're demanding they're demanding uh, salaries and compensation commensurate with somebody who has 10 years of experience. And so all of a sudden, that's changed the job market. So when they're searching for people, they're saying it's an entry level job, but they need them to have 7 years of experience. Why? Because they're thinking that we're going to have to pay them this much. You know, what did you make roughly? What did you make the first real job you had out of college?
Oh, I barely made minimum wage. A little over minimum wage. I mean, that was like probably $8 an hour back then.
Yeah,
You know.
I when I left, the first job offer I had was to teach at Beechwood High School, which is a private school, because I didn't
Yeah.
finish my education degree. I just got a bachelor of music and a minor
Right.
in computer science, but I could teach at the private school because I didn't need a teacher certificate.
Yeah.
They offered me 18 grand a year,
That's
and uh,
about right.
the job I actually took, which they were shocked I wasn't going to take that job, was to work at Wright Patterson Air Force Base,
Yeah, for significantly more money.
and I made 26,000 an hour, and then I turned that into a $30,000 a year job within 6 months. Um, you know, but that's still $24,000 was not, back in the mid 90s was not a high compensation job. I mean, I had plenty of workers who were making 80 and 85,000,
Yeah.
who with only 5 years of experience above me, and and then there were guys who were making six figures, easily making multiple six figures, who had 20 years of experience. But I think what happened is and my youngest daughter is an exception to this because she's math oriented. Um, she went and studied what jobs she's an engineer, so I mean she can draw more money as entry level, but she's not entry level anymore. She's got like three 3 years of experience, and she's also figured out early on that what you do is it's better to negotiate your next job for a big increase while you have a job.
Yeah.
And so, she got her first job. She wasn't really happy there, partly because they didn't have any work for her to do. And so there was always this fear because it was a consulting engineering firm. There was always this fear of being let go
Yeah.
because, hey, we don't have any work. You're on overhead.
Yeah.
And so then she went to her next job and she worked there for almost 2 years. And she's parlayed that into a much more important position with much better benefits and more money. And and things like that, but she also she looked at what she analyzed the numbers to go, this is what I should reasonably expect, in this part of the country where I want to live for this type of job with this amount of experience. And I don't think a lot of these kids, I think they're used to mommy and daddy, and don't get me wrong, I still pay for my kids' cell phones and everything else, but they're used to mommy and daddy taking care of these things. They're used to a standard of living that they want to maintain, not realizing that now that you're out on your own, you may have to give up some of your creature comforts for a while until you establish yourself and show that you can do the work. And so the reason they're unemployed still is because one, their um, inability to accept a job that they don't think is that they're above,
Yeah.
that and two, their inability to realize what their actual market value is.
Well, that's probably the bigger thing of that
Well, I
equation.
mean, that's another social issue in and of itself. This whole everybody gets a trophy for participating and
Well,
all of this. And
everybody's special and deserves the best of the best. That's the sense of entitlement that we were talking about. But
yeah,
I think it goes further than that. I think,
but you're talking at this point, the kids who are entering the workforce, at the entry level, whether you're a college graduate or not, those kids today are like the second or third generation of this whole idea of entitlement. Because it's pervasive enough that there are so many memes and stuff out there where they talk about boomers and Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Zs and Gen Alpha, workers coming into the workplace and just, the ridiculousness of how they work.
right. Well, which was kind of ties into a point that I was about to make, because I think that the truth is actually in the middle of these two
Extremes.
extremes,
Yeah.
and the older workers are all about loyalty and work harder, whereas the younger
It's
generations
more ephemeral.
are more about mobility and work smarter. And the best philosophy is somewhere in the middle there, where
Yeah.
you work hard enough, but also work smart enough.
Yeah.
um but the problem, I think, is that the older guys are locked in because that's their whole experience has been nobody cares, work harder.
Yeah.
Uh, the younger generations have, this is old man coming out, but they've been coddled for so long that they're entitled. They think that the world revolves around
Well,
them.
going back to my point, I think that's why instead of the whole meeting culture getting less with the fact that we have Zoom technology and me WebEx, Zoom, the ability to not have to congregate in a one physical place for everybody. Um, but why we seem to have more meetings. Um, and
Well,
don't
they're
get me-
easier to have now,
well,
which is,
they're easier to have, but the fact that we have more meetings is because um, they need more feedback. It's like a positive reinforcement loop
I can see that.
because, frankly,
It's micromanagement by meeting,
you and you
which
and you and I are very much alike
I
like this, in the sense that I'm going to send you an email and I will be very detailed and accurate in the email and try to answer every question. If you have questions that you'd sent me an email from, or try to anticipate questions you're going to ask so that the answers are already there, so that we don't have to have a call.
yeah,
Whereas kids today are like, can we set up a call and talk?
yeah.
And don't get me wrong, there are moments where there are concepts that are too hard to explain, particularly technical concepts, because there's so many variables, and it's all what if scenarios, and you can't. You'd write a book in an email if you tried to do that. Whereas it makes more sense to talk it out.
Now, on the other hand, now I am
You
friends.
you probably don't get as many what if scenarios as I do.
Oh,
Yeah, but yours are like internal. Mine are like with customers.
that's fair. That's fair. Mainly because
That goes
I
back to my colonel, and she would ask me, "Can we do this?" And I would go, "Yes, ma'am, we can do that. How much money do you have to spend?"
I no longer am a frontline person, so like
Hmm.
I very rarely have direct contact with our customer, so to speak. Um, I was just gonna tell you, on that point, I know a guy that I am friends with who is probably, like I'm in the middle of Gen X. He's on the older end of Gen X. He's probably borderline. Uh,
Boomer.
yeah, he's probably Generation Jones.
Yeah.
You know, that mix of Boomer and Gen X. He was adamant about calling people. Like he didn't want an email. He would insist on that personal touch.
I've worked for a few of those people, and it's like pick up the phone and call them, and there are some legitimate points, because just like we had mentioned before, like. Uh, people will get in arguments, best friends will get in arguments over social media and never talk to each other again in real life. Whereas if they had had that discussion in person, they would not have been so inflammatory, and they would have still probably, they might not have agreed on it, but they would have walked away and still been friends.
Agreed to
And
disagree.
and
Yeah.
and there are moments where phone calls definitely, and same thing where WebExes and stuff, where you can see the look on their face and they can see the look on your face and realize that you're trying to be blunt and not trying to hurt their feelings. The other thing that's also, I think, helps is, or has made the younger generations coming in the workforce more sensitive, is that, frankly, even though women were pervasive in work by the time we got into work, um, there are even more young women in the workforce today than there were. And uh, particularly people of our generation, uh, some of us don't have I'm using the air quotes again. Some of us don't have the soft skills to deal with um, sensitive feelings, and there seem to be a lot more sensitive feelings in the workplace. I worked for a colonel who would come in, and if somebody cried, another female cried in the office, she would go, "There's no crying in the Air Force."
There isn't.
Yeah. So, but those people don't exist today.
Yeah, that's true. Well, they do. They get shown the door
Exactly.
or shoved off into a specialist role where their interaction with the public is
Is
limited.
limited. Yeah, you got it. So
I wouldn't know anything about that.
let's yeah, you wouldn't know anything about that. Let's move on to the next thing. So what kind of as we alluded in the intro, so now we have the AI data center boom, and uh, we have all of these data center facilities worldwide that are but in the United States alone, uh, it is you can't throw a stick without somebody talking about data center. And the big thing is with our current education system, and it's not just our current education system. There are other factors that are forming this, but we have a huge shortage of workers. Not only skilled knowledge workers, people who would work in IT and admin systems and stuff like that. We don't have electricians, we don't have plumbers, we don't have construction workers.
Well, Skynet is going to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Why should we learn how to take care of ourselves if AI is going to take all our jobs?
Well, Wally and Eva are going to do it for us.
I'm just saying. I've seen all these arguments.
But it's funny, but part of that is um the baby boomer generation was huge because we had everybody who survived World War II coming home, and they started having large families. And even people who didn't go to World War II, because everybody else was having large families, and it was also still a time before there was a lot of automation in manufacturing and farming and stuff. So you needed a large family to take care of your family farm, or you needed a large family to uh, fulfill all the, I mean, I don't know how many line workers at General Motors and Ford plants uh, across the country are multi-generational, where their grandfather worked there, and then the son and his brothers worked there, and then the kids and nieces and nephews worked there, uh, you know, over a 40 or 50-year period of time. And but those boomer kids from that boomer generation, and they're leaving the workforce, and we have not we haven't had anything pushing us to increase that or even maintain that population. It's not as bad as like we're seeing in China and Japan, um, but you know there just aren't as many people. And when the boomer generation completely dies out, uh, you're going to have fewer people. When we talk about there's roughly 333 million Americans in the United States of America, I bet you when the boomer generation uh all pass away at that point, even though the Gen X generation was fairly large, but see, that's the boomer generation was the first generation to really start everybody working in the workforce, you know. And so the workforce increased dramatically, and it got smaller with Gen X, and it gets smaller with the millennials, and it gets smaller with Gen Y, because people started not having 5 and 6 kids, but they were having 1 to 3 kids, and now you get into, like, the Gen Zers, and a lot of them are like, "I don't think I'm gonna have any kids."
Oh, not only are they not having kids, they're not even
I
dating.
mean, yeah.
And now there's reasons for that,
Yeah.
which we won't get into here, other than for me to say that like there's an impact happening further and further. The impact of that is this. So like as the workforce demographics decline,
Yeah.
the contributions
Yeah, there's no
to
tax base to cover all the programs that they've had,
Social
and
Security and
yeah,
all the social safety net is in dire straits.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, but part of that is when we increased when the boomers started entering the workforce, part of what that was about was not only did we have people coming back from World War II, but women were in the workforce as well.
Well,
And
that's
so
what
all
that I
those
was
people
saying.
had to all those people had jobs.
Correct.
So the economy had to take a hit. The value of the dollar has shrank considerably.
Considerably. Yeah.
So where like Social Security, for instance, there used to be 4 workers for every one worth of benefits. It's down to less than 2 now, if I'm remembering the statistics
Mhm.
correctly, and you can feel free to write in and tell me what an idiot I am. And, oh, it's 1.4 or 1.7 or whatever the actual number is. My point is that
It's shrinking
it's
dramatically. Yeah.
and it's not a it's a significant shift in that, and it's getting to the point where in real dollars, it's less than one person.
Yeah.
It's less than a 1-to-1 ratio of contributors versus people taking the benefit.
Yep.
That system is unsustainable.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's just one instance in our economy. Our economy is a vastly complex system
But
that we're not taking care of.
yeah. Well, and then the other thing, and this was part of the an emphasis from
And
the
imagine when AI takes all our jobs, then it's going to be even worse because nobody's taxing the AI.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, you'll have enough AI lawyers, so that they can find every tax loophole that exists. So then as a matter of fact, they make the government give them money back.
They, they become yet another draw, another
Yeah.
benefit.
But I mean, it's a completely, like, just like you said, it's completely enmeshed. We also encouraged, um, when we've talked about this in the past, our generation, well, our parents' generation were the first ones where the American dream was you go to college, and that got pushed to us. And it's just continued down the line. So we've encouraged kids educationally, at least in the United States, to go to college and get a college degree, regardless of what they get their degree in. And we
Well,
have not, we have not, uh, maintained people in the skilled trades, which doesn't mean that being a skilled trade and it doesn't mean you were uneducated, but it means it's more like you're a subject matter expert, again, and so you're a certified electrician. Well, that's an important job. You're a certified plumber. That's an important job. Um,
but we've devalued those
we've
jobs over the
devalued
years.
those jobs because the whole idea was, well, again, money. They told the lie that just because you have a college degree, you can demand more money. But then also, uh, colleges are businesses, which nobody wants to say. And so they wanted everybody to go to college so that they could take more money and then take more
Well,
government program money.
and that's why they continue to tolerate a declining educational rigor.
Hmm.
It's about
What?
now getting the money. It's not about teaching the next generation the skills that they need to survive and thrive.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that just ties right into, the looming labor crunch. Um, the funny thing is, and I do believe this. I've read a ton of articles on this, and I've read a lot of articles that were not, like, written from the perspective of, like, these AI guys trying to you know, reassure people that, you know, their their jobs aren't going away. Are we going to lose jobs to AI? Yes. The problem is it's just like when automation came into manufacturing. It's not about losing jobs. We gained a lot more jobs because you had to have people to maintain those machines, but we don't have the skills base to support the jobs that are out there. We don't have enough tech savvy people, from a tech worker point of view. We don't have enough healthcare workers today. Now, I think there's a totally different reason for that, but um, we also, we don't have skilled trades. We brought up teaching, and it's not that we have a lack of teachers; it's that we have a lack of
Quality
quality
teachers.
teachers. Um,
But that I think is pervasive across multiple industries and
it is. Well, and one of the things that, and I do truly believe this is I don't I'm not against getting rid of or I'm not for or against getting rid of the H-1B visa program. I understand the reason it was created, and again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But I think it's become the easy button for companies in the United
oh,
States
it totally has.
because basically one H-1B visa holders are not the visa is actually held by the company, not held by the individual. And they're not American uh, citizens, but most of the money and they've done economic analysis to look at this, and that's why it's become an argument. The money that when they bring in H-1B worker incomes, and yeah, they still get their tax money. And that's why the government's not hurt. But what they haven't figured out is that the money's not that from those workers is not going back into our economy. It's going to other economies because they're sending the majority of that money home. They're only keeping enough money for to live here and survive, frankly. Um, and so I think the rigor on how you can get an H-1B visa. I also think I thought Trump's plan for it was perfect, which is if you want to do an H-1B visa, then it's a couple $100,000 a year, or it's $1 million a year per visa that you need because you got to. I don't want because the government has a dilemma here. It's really the burden of proof becomes on them to determine whether or not there are not people who can fulfill those jobs in the country. Now, I would argue on the side of getting rid of H-1B visas entirely is that instead of spending the money on that, you would have to do the rigor. Uh, you would use that money to re-educate workers in the United States to fulfill these supposedly rarefied roles. And I mean, Tim Cook has been talking about this for years, about they're not really engineers, even though that's what they call them in China. Um, but they're skilled trades in manufacturing that know how to program the PLCs and the CNC machines and all of this to build high tech electronics and things. And now we kind of have a glut of them here, not because there's a glut of them nationally, but because one of our local universities or community colleges, that's their specialty is and every graduate they have not only has a job while they're in school there, but permanent employment once they leave. Um, and only one school can do that, do so much of that. And but we don't have enough of those in the United States. So when we start talking about bringing manufacturing back, which we are, I mean, we truly are. I've seen real examples of it. But the labor unions aren't happy because it's not involving people. It's involving automation because we're using the few trained people we have to be able to help us design automation to be able to do that work in lieu of having trained people.
But so much of that is about
And don't get me
reducing
else
the cost of business.
business, yes.
And that I think
Well,
is
robots don't call in sick.
exactly.
Robots don't backtalk you when you say do more, you know.
They either break down or they don't,
Exactly.
you know?
And
And that's a production problem that can be
also em-
anticipated and accounted for.
employees are a recurring cost,
Cost.
whereas even though you might have to replace something, robots and automation typically are capital cost, and you can depreciate that, or you can at least calculate how much you are actually paying for it by year. And again, it's one of those things where you have data and you have emotion, and the emotion is not looking at the data and going, oh, I understand this, maybe I should change my argument, or maybe we should look at it from the perspective of, yeah. And that's one of the things I don't understand labor unions. I mean, I understand the value when they were created for labor unions to some degree. Don't get me wrong, I don't think they were perfect. They're not perfect.
Well, no human institution is. I think that's one of the things
But
that
one of the things I think
unions don't get.
labor unions need to understand is the reality of it is as these shifts and stuff happen in the workforce for the need of certain types of workers, they need to transition. They need to provide education programs. Do something with that trust of money that that all the labor union dues have paid, instead of using it as strike funds. Because that's the thing. The more often you strike, eventually the companies will go, I'm either shutting my plant down, which is what General Motors did all over the country, or we're going to automate. And if you are going to strike on me because we're trying to automate more positions, but you don't have more workers to give me, then I'm going to automate everything. Sue me in court. I've got to, I can darken the skies with lawyers. They do, these big, corporations, they can. So let us know how you feel about this. Please provide some feedback to GizmoSapiens@gmail.com. That's GizmoSapiens@gmail.com. Or leave a comment on episode 280 on our website at www.gizmosapiens.com. And we'll see you on the digital flip side.
You've been listening to Gizmo Sapiens, a technology and entertainment podcast. You can reach us at our email address at gizmosapiens@gmail.com. That's GizmoSapiens@gmail.com. We'd really love to hear from you, and we'll see you next week from the Digital Flipside.